Is Venezuela safer because the delinquents, quote unquote, left the country for the United States? Well, today we discuss.
Welcome to Venezuela Insider, the only place in Venezuela for expats, digital nomads, entrepreneurs, investors, travelers, and related internationals. For more information, venezuelainsider.com.
In Venezuela, violent crime is down 67% because they took their criminals and their gang members and their drug dealers and they moved them into the United States of America, and their crime is now down 67%. That's the beauty.
So today I'm gonna do some rumor control.
Thank you, gentlemen. This is rumor control. Here are the facts.
Regarding the safety situation in Venezuela. And that rumor comes from former US President and possibly future US President Donald Trump. Well, two things regarding the public address of President Trump is that first, that Venezuela has gotten yes on that ballpark number, and that particular case is true. 60% or 60% more safer, Venezuela, country has gotten more safe on the past decade, and yes, that is correct. And the second statement that he's wrong is regarding that the country right now is safer because the delinquents are migrating to the United States, and that is completely false. And today, we are going to discuss why. First, let's address the first part, the Venezuela getting safer. And yes, that is correct. That happened, that the trend diminished in 2015. That's kind of the day. Many things happen thanks to that. And the first reason is, yes, indeed, migration. Of course, when you have less people in a particular location, of course, you have less criminal activity because you have less people. And that's it. But that is not the main issue. Actually, I put a bunch of statistics here in the channel that come from the OVV, Observatorio Venezolano de Violencia, or Venezuelan Violence Observatory. And this is an independent NGO that tracks the criminal activity in Venezuela in statistics. And according to the director of this particular NGO, or OVV, he described that one of the reasons why the Venezuelan criminal activity has diminished significantly on the past decade is that we have less young people, sadly. Because according to him, you have basically both kinds of violence. You have the criminal activity, the formal criminal activity and violence, and also you have the random violence. According to him, the formal activity, formal criminal institutions or organizations, as you want to call it, this part apparently they are still operating in the country. Of course, they do it from a business perspective, quote unquote, you want to call it like that. And what happens is, at the end, the bottom line is the more important. They don't commit crimes because just for the pleasure of committing crimes. They do it because they have a financial incentive in order to commit a crime. So it's bad for business, quote unquote, committing crimes that they don't bring you a financial incentive. And according to, of course, the business perspective of this kind of people, they usually concentrate on lucrative activities where they only need to commit a handful of crimes and keep a particular structure for the particular business. And I'm not that kind of business, so I cannot tell. I'm just presuming with this information. So you just need, of course, the less crimes that you commit and the more financial gains that you have for each particular crime, it's going to be more profitable the business. I mean, just thinking as a business, please. Pardon me, I beg your pardon because I'm not on that particular industry. Anyways, what happens is that this particular, of course, is a structure that has also a hierarchy and that kind of stuff, and they do it on particular locations in the country, so on. And they commit their particular activities, trying to offset the less both the average population and also the local authorities if they are not involved. I'm not saying they're involved in anything like that. Please, not an expert on that particular business industry. Now you have the second kind of crime that is committed at any particular society is the random crime. And according to this particular specialist in crime, those ones are committed, for instance, in Venezuela, they are committed usually by young people from lower socioeconomic status. And usually, according to those particular analysts on the industry, is that, yes, we have less young people in Venezuela, and hence, it's a direct correlation, we have less crimes, less random crimes committed in Venezuela. Those particular crimes doesn't have a particular financial incentive, and when they are committed for a particular financial incentive, usually the marginal analysis for committing those crimes is terrible, and most young people, of course, commit terrible decisions. In the particular case of young criminals, what they do is commit violent acts of violence, like a gun robbery or a kidnap, that kind of stuff. Also, you have to add that the average Venezuelan has gotten impoverished on the past decade, until 2019, then their standards and their purchasing power has started to recover a little bit. But in the midst of the crisis, of course, most people were impoverished, so you don't have pretty much nothing to gain from them. When the particular young people commit these particular violent crimes, that the ROI of committing those acts is very low, they are more likely to be involved themselves on a violent situation, either against, of course, their victims and their relatives, or also getting an issue with local authorities, or even amongst these other cohorts of young and violent people. Other thing that you have to add regarding that Venezuela has gotten safer narrative is that actually the government has implemented some strategies regarding public security, usually attacking the sources of the problem. And by the way, I'm not saying that the Venezuelan government has become better on this particular regard, but actually they have taken some actions on this particular regard. What happened is, and this is something that you have to understand about Venezuela, it's not like the country is insecure or safe. Most cities, most areas in Venezuela are actually quite safe. The issue is where most of the crimes are committed in slums, in very impoverished areas, very particular areas that you should avoid if you want to be safe in Venezuela. And in most areas in Venezuela, even some, let's say, lower class ones, even those areas can be safe as well. But if you avoid certain areas like, slums and quote-unquote favelas, we don't have favelas in Venezuela, but still, well, that's just for the sake of the conversation, call it favelas. And particular dreadful neighborhoods, most of those crimes are committed on those particular areas. And during a few years span, actually, the Venezuelan government activated what is known as the OLPs. It's known as Operación Liberación del Pueblo, or People Liberation Operation, something like that. Well, basically, many effectives and personnel, both policemen and military, were taken to the places where were more unsafe here in Venezuela, and they took draconian measures, let's say, and they took, let's say, strong measures in order to contain, let's say, the crime rates that were coming from those particular hotspots in the country. Another issue, going again with the migration situation, that I know that President Trump doesn't like migration, especially from poor countries, especially from Latin American countries. I mean, that okay? Hey, that's the thing. If you're a Trump voter, very good for you. I mean, don't criticize, but it is what it is. President Trump and actually many Republicans have that particular bias. Okay. Now, the main issue with that is that he doesn't like migration. And of course, the dire situation in Venezuela last decade caused a huge migration. And he's accusing and that many Venezuelans are entering illegally to the United States. And well, first, they are not entering illegal. You can enter to the United States and plead for asylum, being an asylum seeker or a refugee, and getting a refugee status, and that's actually legal. So actually most of the Venezuelan migration is quote unquote legal according to the US migration code. So I'm not an expert on that particular regard, but anyway. The main point is that of course we had this terrible migration, but most of them didn't went to the United States. They went to neighboring countries here in Latin America, mostly to Colombia, Peru, Chile, Ecuador, Brazil, Argentina, and even Spain received a bunch of Venezuelan migrants. And of course, on a lesser degree, the US as well. I'm not saying that is not the case. However, what happens is since 2019, let's say 2019, 2020, most of the migrants, and also I have to add that the Venezuelan diaspora is fairly young compared to the Mexican diaspora or the Chinese diaspora or the Indian diaspora or other parts of Latin American diaspora. So everyone has a very big diaspora. And most of them, let's say like 80% or 90%, even I can say, from Venezuelan migrants, they are on a dire situation, very making ends meet on their third country. And of course, when we had this collapse on 2017, 2018, most countries in the world, they were way more appealing than staying in Venezuela. By the way, no hate with that. I understand the situation. However, they miscalculated the benefits of going to a third country, especially one in Latin America, like Peru or Colombia. Because then the economic gap between Venezuela and those other countries in Latin America is actually very narrow. The standards of living for the average population over there still bad, and it's Latin America. Latin America is one of the poorest regions in the world, less developed regions in the world. And of course, a handful of people have excellent standards of living in Latin America, but most, they are struggling financially and it's very hard to make ends meet. Very good. That's why many people from all over the world migrate to the United States because they think that they can have a better standard of living in the US. Okay. The main issue is that since 2018, 2020, Venezuelan migrants, younger veterans on migration, 2 or 3 years, on Peru, Colombia, Chile, Ecuador, anyways, also Argentina, they saw that these particular Latin American countries are financially, economically not that much better than Venezuela. So they say, you know what, some of them actually came back to Venezuela, but a significant portion of them say, you know what, if I'm migrating to the quote-unquote best country to migrate, that is the United States. And around 80-90% of Venezuelans that are going to the southern border, crossing to the US, are actually Venezuelans that they don't live in Venezuela. They were living the past 5 years or so on a third country in Latin America, like Peru, and they decided to go to the United States, take a shot in order to improve their particular standards of living. And I have explained many times that since the migration law and migration system of the United States is draconian and terrible, and that's why in the US you have terrible and draconian migration situations, like we're seeing right now, regardless if they are Democrats or Republicans. And what happens is that the migration system in the US discourages the migration of top-tier talent especially from Latin America. The top-tier Venezuelan has no interest to migrate to the US because the conditions are not there. They don't have a clear path in order to migrate legally to the United States, like most people in the US like their migration to be. So, for instance, I'm going to say straight, someone like myself, I have no incentive to migrate to the United States because the legal path is not there, and also I don't have any financial incentive in order to migrate to the United States. And most of my peers feel the same. Amongst, of course, there could be a few exceptions every now and then. Meanwhile, the more impoverished Venezuelan, the less sophisticated one, is the one that is more motivated in order to migrate to the United States. They don't mind going this very particular and dangerous path using the Darien Gap on the Panama jungle and Colombian jungle, and then going throughout all Central America, then reaching Mexico that has a terrible migration system by themselves, by the way, and also a country in Mexico that has very xenophobic authorities, and hence they are putting, if you're a Venezuelan or another migrant, using Mexico, Mexican authorities are dangerous for you. Actually, you can die, you can get injured and die when you are managed by Mexican authorities. It is what it is. Actually, a handful of Venezuelans sadly pass away, meaning custody of the Mexican authorities, and they pass away and nobody cared over there. And it's a sad fact, and that pisses me off a lot as a Venezuelan. My fellow Venezuelans died for Mexican authorities' negligence. And well, the bottom line is that it's a draconian pursuit. And of course, the top tier people, they are not going to be able to migrate to the United States. They have no incentive in order to migrate to the United States. Meanwhile, people that are more risk prone and, let's say, more desperate on a more dire situation are the ones that are being attracted by this particular draconian system of the US. And I'm going to use an example of Chile, that they were able to attract actually very good talent from Venezuela. Back in the day, the Chilean migration system, they give you residency, a temporary residency, if you have major studies, or you were a college graduate. You can actually apply for residency in Chile. And that's the reason why many white-collar professionals with fewer opportunities here in Venezuela, they were able to migrate legally to Chile, and they are doing pretty much well. And then since something happened with the Chilean migration system, they attracted also the worst a few years afterwards of the Venezuelan society, and that's why we have a bunch of xenophobic incidents in Chile. But that's another story. Going back with the US, same thing, the incentives for top-tier Venezuelan talent are not there. That's why Venezuelan talent is not migrating. The top tier is not migrating to the United States. Meanwhile, the bottom of the barrel are the only ones that are incentivized in order to migrate to the US. And by the way, if you're listening to this, if you're a Venezuelan listening to this from the US, first I have to explain the diaspora, the Venezuelan diaspora to the US has mutated a lot. Usually on the 10, 15 years ago, the Venezuelans that used to go to the US migrating either legally or illegally, whatever may be the case, but were actually white-collar professionals, middle-class people, entrepreneurial people, and so on and so on. So they were able to attract decent talent from Venezuela, and I wish them the best. And some of them are actually right now US citizens right now, so wish the best. Meanwhile, years pass by, and since the US system has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse, the Venezuelan talent that they are able to attract in the US is worse and worse and worse and worse, less sophisticated, with lower education levels and so on. And also with lower networks, because at some point, the Venezuelans that migrated to the US actually had a decent network, let's say a 6-figure network with a few homes and business and that kind of stuff. So they can just sell everything in Venezuela and try to create wealth in the US. Some of them were able to accomplish that. Most of them, they were not able to accomplish that, but still with other opportunities as well. Anyways, and by the way, another thing, if you're listening to this, also a lot of good people from Venezuela are going, in the past few years, have migrated to the US. And also great people, I'm talking because even the more humble people that are migrating right now to the US are the ones, also hardworking people with education from their homes and also with trade skills. So still valuable people, but on that cohort of people, there are more likely to see people that, less sophisticated, commit crimes, and commit civil offenses in the US. There are more prone. I'm not saying that most of them actually are good people, and the people going right now to the US. But on that cohort of people, you have more people likely to commit these civil offenses against the US. And lastly, I have to address yet again that the number of Venezuelan criminals in the US is very, very, very low. And a handful of cases from several hundred thousands of Venezuelans are criminals. I'm talking, let's say, a very narrow fraction of the Venezuelan population in the US are actually criminals and also civil offenders. But the thing is also the bad news propagates rapidly in the US, especially with these right-wing platforms like Fox News.
Narrative first, whole story never. On Fox, a Venezuelan migrant is always stabbing a white lady. And on NPR, where they stop bashing the rich long enough only to beg for money.
And also social media that propagates this bad news. Meanwhile, the significant majority of Venezuelans, 98, 99% of Venezuelans, hardworking people, very well educated, with skills, very humble, the only one to increase their socioeconomic status, working very hard, most of them barely making ends meet, but they integrate to the American society. However, they are not sexy for these particular platforms like Fox News. That, by the way, if you're listening to this, it's not I'm bashing just Fox News. The whole Western mainstream media is crap. I mentioned this a bunch of times in this platform. CNN, BBC, Deutsche Welle, MSNBC, you name it. They all are crap and give you terrible information. And this time is the turn of Fox News because those are the ones. And if you're listening to this from Fox News, you have a terrible platform as well. And in order to sum it up, in order to answer this particular address from President Trump. Number one, Venezuela is getting safer. Yes, it's way more safer compared to the past decade. And even past decades has been safe if you stay on a decent area. And unless you go to a slum or something, or you are on particular sketchy activities, in Venezuela, you're going to be pretty much safe. Very good. Second thing, Venezuela is getting safer because Venezuela is sending their criminals to the US. The answer is no. A handful of Venezuelan criminals, since the structure and the incentives of the terrible migration policies of the US, has gotten a window in order to access, of course, the US and commit crimes over there. Those are a significant fraction of those particular people. And the people in charge of putting the migration system and laws and kind of stuff, those are the ones responsible for letting the quote-unquote Venezuelan criminals enter the US. So mostly you have to blame people like, in this particular case, President Donald Trump, but also you have to blame President Joe Biden, both the Democrats and Republicans. Those are the people in charge. And remember, I'm going to say this goes for everyone. You cannot have authority without having responsibility. And I'm sorry, if you're listening to this, Mr. Trump, you were the president of the most powerful nation in the world. So in your particular case, you were responsible to maybe addressing the terrible migration policies, but you are not going to do so because you are a populist right-wing president. And also, you have to add, and I'm going with both sides of the aisle, by the way. And also, you have people like Joe Biden, that is a left-leaning populist president. And thanks to that, and thanks to terrible policies from both sides of the aisle, so don't accuse me of being one of those aisles. I'm not on any particular side. The bottom line, you have to blame your local politicians in the US that develop terrible policies that create terrible results.
Thank you for watching Venezuela Insider. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on social media. If you want to work with us, VenezuelaInsider.com. Thanks again, and have a nice day.